The men who had once been trapped behind the cold walls of Fox River were now running through the open night. Michael Scofield and his team had tasted freedom, but it was sharp and fleeting, carried on breaths of panic and sirens. They were no longer prisoners, yet they were far from free men. Now they were fugitives, hunted across the country. Michael kept his calm, his eyes scanning ahead, his mind already calculating the next phase of the plan. The escape from Fox River had been only the beginning. Beyond the prison walls awaited something far more dangerous, the full weight of the law. And leading the chase was a man as methodical and unrelenting as Michael himself, FBI agent Alexander Mahone. Unlike the guards of Fox River, Mahone possessed a mind sharp enough to trace Michael's hidden steps, and that made him the deadliest opponent yet. In the first hours of their run, the group stayed together, bound by the urgency of survival. But cracks soon began to appear. Teabag, driven by selfish instincts, sought his own advantage. Abruzzi pushed forward with visions of reclaiming his lost power. C-Note's heart burned with the dream of reuniting with his family. Sucre's every breath was for Maricruz, waiting beyond the walls. And Lincoln, carrying the shadow of death on his shoulders, longed only to stay alive and see his son again. Michael faced the near-impossible task of holding these men together. Inside the tunnel, unity had been their strength. But in the vastness of the outside world, freedom itself pulled them apart. Still, Michael pressed forward, guided by the marks etched into his skin, symbols and codes that pointed toward the next stage of the escape. Inside Fox River, the fallout was immediate. Sarah Tancredi stood shaken, her life forever altered by the choice she had made. By leaving the doors unlocked, she had become part of Michael's plan. Now she was left to face her father's fury, the burden of her profession and the turmoil of her heart. Her trust in Michael had become a weight she could no longer set down. Warden Pope, humiliated and broken, struggled with the collapse of his authority. Years of control had been unraveled in one night by the mind of a single man. Bellic, stripped of respect, boiled with anger, his pride shattered as the fugitives mocked him with their absence. Out in the fields, Agent Mahone began to close in. He studied Michael's moves, recognizing the intelligence behind them. The tattoos, the symbols, the breadcrumbs left behind, they weren't random. Mahone understood he wasn't chasing ordinary criminals. He was chasing a mind like his own, and that realization fueled his obsession. As the night stretched on, the fugitives began to split, each man pulled by his own desires and fears. Freedom was no longer a shared vision, but a personal destiny for each of them. Michael and Lincoln pressed toward the next checkpoint, but Mahone's shadow loomed closer with every passing step. The episode revealed a chilling truth. Escaping Fox River had not granted freedom. It had merely opened the door to a new pursuit. The prison was behind them, but the manhunt had only just begun. The first night of freedom had passed, but for Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows, the road ahead was only growing more dangerous. Fox River was behind them, yet their pursuit had intensified. They were no longer chased by ordinary guards. Now the hunt was led by FBI agent Alexander Mahone, a man whose intelligence mirrored Michael's own. Mahone had already begun piecing together the patterns of the escape, step by calculated step. Michael and Lincoln pressed toward their rendezvous point, the urgency of time heavy on their shoulders. Sirens echoed in the distance, the shadows of trees stretching like threats across their path. Michael stayed calm, mapping each choice with precision, but Lincoln's impatience boiled over. The thought of his son consumed him, and every delay felt like another chain binding him to the past. Meanwhile, Sarah Tancredi faced the consequences of her choice. By leaving the doors unlocked, she had crossed a line she could never return from. Her father's political influence closed in on her, pressing with cold authority. Yet despite the danger, Sarah could not shake Michael's presence. Every word, every glance still lingered in her, drawing her further into his world. Back at Fox River, lives unraveled. Warden Pope, stripped of his dignity, resigned under the weight of failure. Bellick, humiliated and dismissed from his position, burned with fury. What began as wounded pride twisted into obsession. For him, capturing the fugitives became a personal vendetta. The other escapees scattered across different paths. Soka risked everything to find Maricruz, love pulling him forward more strongly than freedom itself. C-Note's every step was toward his family, determined to reunite no matter the cost. And Teabag, sinister and relentless, carved his own path, feeding his freedom with malice and cruelty. Mahone studied the escape with meticulous care. The tattoos, the codes, the signs Michael had left behind. He began to see the greater design. It wasn't luck. It was planning, years in the making, and that realization tightened his obsession. This was no longer a manhunt. It was a duel between two minds, each move answered by another. Finally, Michael and Lincoln reached Otis Avenue, their designated checkpoint. But the street was not a place of safety. It was a trap of uncertainty. The closer they came to freedom, the closer Mahone's shadow drew. Every second narrowed the space between escape and capture. The episode revealed the harsh truth: Fox River had only been the beginning. The real struggle lay in the world beyond, where freedom meant running faster, hiding smarter, and outthinking not just the system, but a man as relentless as Mahone. Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows had stepped into freedom, but the shadows chasing them were more dangerous than ever. FBI agent Alexander Mahone was no ordinary pursuer. His sharp mind was beginning to unravel Michael's method, noticing the patterns hidden within the tattoos. What had once been an escape was now transforming into a deadly chess match between two brilliant minds. Seeking a brief moment of rest, Michael and Lincoln hid inside a small house. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them. Hunger, sleepless nights, and the constant pressure of being hunted. Lincoln's impatience clashed with Michael's calm calculations. He trusted his brother's plan, yet the thought of being caught before seeing his son again gnawed at him. Every passing second made him more restless, while Michael remained focused on the larger picture. Mahone, meanwhile, dove deeper into Michael's psyche. He saw the patterns of perfection, the obsession with structure and order. Michael wasn't improvising. He was following a map written long before the escape began. For Mahone, breaking that map apart became more than duty. It was personal. Matching wits with Michael was a test of his own intellect, and he was determined not to lose. Elsewhere, the other fugitives carved out their separate paths. Soka risked everything in his quest to find Maricruz, his love pulling him across the miles with more force than fear ever could. C-Note clung to the hope of reuniting with his family, his every move driven by longing. And Teabag, cunning and ruthless, continued down his dark path, twisting freedom into another cruel game for himself. Sarah Tancredi remained entangled in the aftermath of her choice. The pressure from her father weighed heavily, but in her heart, the connection she felt to Michael grew stronger. Every step she took, every decision she made blurred the line between duty and personal conviction. She was no longer acting only as a doctor. Her humanity had taken hold. Bellick, stripped of his job and dignity, carried his anger like a weapon. Though no longer in uniform, he pursued the fugitives with vengeance in his heart. For him, the chase was no longer about justice, but about reclaiming pride. Back in the hideout, Michael studied the tattoos once again, tracing the lines that would guide them forward. But even as he searched for the next step, Mahone's shadow drew closer, a mirror of his own intellect closing in on every decision. The episode made one thing clear: freedom was not wide and endless, but narrow and fragile. Every move outside the prison walls was as dangerous as those within. The chase was no longer against time alone. It had become a battle of minds. Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows moved restlessly through their first days of freedom. Beyond the walls of Fox River, life had not grown easier. it had become far more dangerous. FBI agent Alexander Mahone was on their trail, step by step. He had already begun to decipher the secrets behind Michael's tattoos, unraveling the logic that shaped the escape. What had started as a run for survival was turning into a deadly contest of intellects. As Michael and Lincoln searched for a place to hide, they knew shelter wasn't enough. They needed money, transportation, and resources if they were to continue with the second phase of the plan. Every move outside, however, was a gamble. Each decision was a thin line between freedom and capture. Lincoln's impatience clashed with Michael's calm strategy. Lincoln longed only to reach his son, while Michael insisted that precision and patience were their only real weapons. Meanwhile, the FBI widened the net. Under Mahone's command, the manhunt stretched across state lines. Mahone studied Michael's past, his choices, his methods. He began to think as Michael thought, retracing his logic in an almost eerie parallel. With each step, Michael's movements became more predictable. For Michael to stay ahead, he would need to add more layers of misdirection, more risks, and more sacrifices. Elsewhere, the other fugitives followed their own paths. Soka risked everything to get to Maricruz, the woman he loved more than freedom itself. C-Note clung to his hope of reuniting with his family, each decision bound to the dream of holding them again. Teabag, brutal and cunning, limped onward with a severed hand but unbroken will, proving that nothing could extinguish his dangerous persistence. Sara Tancredi found herself drowning in conflict. Her father's political influence pressed down on her, while her heart pulled her toward Michael. The choice she had made to trust him continued to shape her future. Every sign of him, every memory, deepened her conviction that Michael was not simply a criminal, but a man chasing something greater than himself. Bellick, stripped of his job and his pride, took matters into his own hands. His pursuit of the fugitives became personal vengeance rather than justice. His humiliation at Fox River fueled his rage, driving him to hunt them with reckless determination. As Michael and Lincoln tried to stay one step ahead, Mahone's intelligence closed the gap. The chase was no longer just a physical pursuit, but a mental duel. Two minds locked in a dangerous rhythm, each trying to outmaneuver the other. By the end of the episode, freedom seemed both near and impossibly far. Michael and Lincoln were still running, but with Mahone closing in, the world outside the prison felt as suffocating as the cells they had left behind. The game was no longer escape, it was survival against a relentless enemy. Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows could only taste freedom for fleeting moments. The hunt closing in on them was unlike anything they had faced before, because FBI agent Alexander Mahone had begun to decode the very foundation of Michael's plan. The tattoos, once their greatest advantage, were now being unraveled. Hidden within them lay a clue called Map 1213, a key to the next stage of the escape. Michael studied the symbols on his skin, searching for the path forward. Each mark, each number carried meaning, guiding him and his brother towards safety. The escape was built on mathematical precision, a puzzle of routes and timing. Yet Mahone was following the same trail. What Michael had designed as an intricate map for freedom was becoming a thread for his pursuer to pull. Lincoln's impatience surged once more. His single focus was on reuniting with his son, and every detour, every delay felt unbearable. He pressed Michael, demanding faster answers, but Michael refused to compromise. He knew that without following the entire plan, their freedom would crumble into nothing. This tension between the brothers grew heavier with every step, threatening to unravel their unity. Mahone, relentless and calculating, dug deeper into Michael's mind. The more he studied the tattoos, the more he understood the logic beneath them. Michael was not improvising. He was executing a design forged long before Fox River. Mahone mirrored his thoughts, dissecting each move, tightening the circle with each discovery. The escape was no longer a flight of bodies. It had become a duel of minds. Elsewhere, the other fugitives pursued their own destinies. Zuka risked capture at every turn, driven by the hope of reaching Maricruz. For him, freedom had only one meaning: love. C-Note carried the same weight of longing, every choice bound to the dream of reuniting with his family. And Teabag, merciless and cunning, dragged himself forward, turning his freedom into a cruel game where others' pain fed his survival. Sarah Tancredi remained torn. The pressure from her father pressed down hard, but the bond she felt with Michael grew impossible to ignore. She traced the faint trails he left behind, drawn into his world step by step. Sarah no longer questioned whether Michael was hiding something; she was certain of it. What unsettled her was the conviction that his secrets carried a purpose greater than himself. Bellic, consumed by anger and humiliation, continued his personal pursuit. He was no longer an officer of the law, but a man chasing vengeance. The collapse of his authority at Fox River drove him with reckless fury, turning the chase into a personal vendetta. As Michael and Lincoln drew closer to the location marked by Map 1213, Mahone's shadow loomed dangerously close. Every step forward carried them nearer to freedom, but also closer to capture. The path they followed had become a razor's edge. The episode closed with a chilling reminder. Freedom was no longer about running faster. It was about outthinking the enemy. The game was survival, and only the sharper mind would endure. Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows followed the path marked by Map 1213, which led them into the quiet streets of a suburban neighborhood. On the surface, it looked peaceful, but hidden within was a crucial step of the escape plan. This was where the next phase would unfold. Yet every move they made was shadowed by FBI agent Alexander Mahone, who was now solving Michael's designs with alarming speed. Each clue Michael had left behind was being turned against him. Guided by the codes inked on his body, Michael directed Lincoln toward a specific house. Inside, hidden away long before, were supplies, tools, equipment, and essentials that would help continue their journey. But the moment they drew near, Mahone had already set his trap. The FBI surrounded the area, and suddenly time itself became their enemy. Every second counted. Lincoln's frustration boiled over again. He wanted only to reach his son, and every pause felt like another obstacle. Michael, however, insisted on following the precise steps of the plan. His calm calculations clashed with Lincoln's urgency, and their brotherly tension grew sharper under the weight of pursuit. Elsewhere, the other fugitives faced struggles of their own. Zuka risked everything in his desperate attempt to reunite with Maricruz. Love gave him courage, but also blinded him to danger. C-Note moved with the same determination for his family, but fear of capture gnawed at him with every choice. Teabag, sly and ruthless, continued his twisted game, turning freedom into an excuse for cruelty. Sarah Tancredi, meanwhile, followed the faint traces Michael had left behind. Her doubts about him deepened, but so did the pull of trust that tied her heart to his. Her father's influence bore down heavily, trying to silence her, yet she couldn't stop herself from searching for the truth. Each step she took drew her further into Michael's world. Bellic, stripped of his authority, refused to give up the chase. Fueled by rage and humiliation, he hunted the fugitives on his own terms. For him, this was no longer about justice, but about revenge, and that made him even more dangerous. Inside the suburban house, Michael and Lincoln moved quickly, racing to act before the FBI could close in. Mahone's insight had brought him dangerously close, and Michael knew it. Staring at the codes etched into his skin, he searched for another way forward. Improvisation became as critical as the plan itself. The episode built toward the tightening clash between Michael and Mahone, a battle of strategy and willpower. Freedom was no longer about the tunnels and the maps alone. It was about who could think faster, act sharper, and outmaneuver the other in a game where every second mattered. Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows pressed on in their desperate search for freedom. But survival now required more than just staying ahead of the FBI. They needed resources. And hidden in their plan was the memory of buried money, cash that had been stashed years earlier, waiting to be unearthed. In this chapter, hope and betrayal became inseparably intertwined. Guided by the coded symbols inked on his body, Michael tried to track the precise location of the buried treasure. Every mark led them closer, but each step also risked exposure. Mahone, relentless in his pursuit, had already begun to piece together the same puzzle. To him, Michael's tattoos were not just designs, but a map, one that could lead him straight into the fugitive's path. For Mahone, this was no longer about duty. It had become an obsession, a battle of intellects where only one mind could triumph. Lincoln, torn by his fatherly instincts, grew restless. His thoughts were consumed by LJ, the son he longed to save. To him, the money was just a tool, nothing more than fuel for the mission of bringing his family back together. Michael, however, clung to the bigger picture. He knew that without every part of the plan intact, their fragile freedom would collapse. This contrast of purpose strained the bond between the brothers, adding weight to their already impossible journey. Meanwhile, the other fugitives were also drawn to the same buried fortune. Zucker, blinded by love, believed the money was the only way he could reclaim Maricruz. Zeno saw no future for his family without it. And Teabag, ever deceitful and cunning, treated the treasure as his rightful prize, twisting freedom into greed. For him, the buried cash symbolized power, and he would stop at nothing to take it. Sarah Tancredi faced a different battle. Her father's influence pressed on her like a chain, pulling her further away from the truth she sought. Yet Michael's trail, faint but persistent, kept calling her back. She could no longer separate her heart from the choices she was making. Michael's secrets, she believed, carried purpose far greater than crime. Bellick, stripped of his authority and dignity, found himself pulled into the chase for the money. No longer a man of law, he was driven by rage and greed. For him, reclaiming the buried fortune was not just about survival, but about reclaiming a sense of control he had lost. As the episode unfolded, the hidden money became the focal point of every pursuit. Buried beneath the soil, it was more than a cache of bills. It was the embodiment of freedom, trust, betrayal, and desire. To Michael, it was merely a step in the design. To others, it was everything. The episode ended with all roads converging on the same buried prize. The ground itself seemed to hold the future of each fugitive. Yet the question remained: who would claim it, and what price would be paid in blood, loyalty, or sacrifice? Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows felt the pressure mounting as they closed in on the buried money. It was no longer just the FBI hunting them. Every fugitive now had their eyes on the same treasure. The hidden fortune became the axis around which all their futures turned. In deadfall, trust collapsed under the weight of greed, and alliances crumbled into betrayal. Following the coded trails etched into his skin, Michael led his brother toward the spot where the money lay. But they weren't alone. Zucker, desperate to secure a future with Maricruz, moved toward the prize with reckless determination. C-Note saw the cash as the only way to keep his family safe, and Teabag, ruthless and manipulative, prowled with a hunger for control. Each man sought the same goal, but for reasons that clashed violently. Cooperation became nearly impossible. Lincoln's frustration grew sharper. To him, the money meant nothing compared to his son. Every second spent chasing it felt like a betrayal of his real mission. Michael, however, stood firm. Without the money, there would be no fuel for their journey, no chance of long-term freedom. This conflict between the brothers deepened, testing the very bond that had carried them this far. Meanwhile, Mahone advanced relentlessly. His ability to think like Michael, to mirror his logic, made him more dangerous with each step. He wasn't just a pursuer anymore. He had become Michael's dark reflection. Every move the brothers made seemed to echo inside Mahone's mind, narrowing the gap until freedom felt like a fragile illusion. Sucre reached a breaking point, willing to sacrifice loyalty for love. C-Note, driven by desperation, placed his family above all else, and Teabag, the embodiment of deceit, twisted the fragile group dynamic, manipulating at every turn. For him, trust was nothing more than bait for his own survival. Sarah Tancredi found herself drawn deeper into Michael's world. Despite her father's unyielding influence, she could no longer deny the pull of trust that tied her to Michael. Every clue she uncovered pulled her further into the conflict, blurring the line between choice and destiny. Bellic, consumed by greed and humiliation, hurled himself into the hunt. For him, the buried money was not only survival, but redemption. Yet his pursuit made him even more dangerous, a rival with nothing left to lose. By the end of the episode, the buried fortune became a storm center of betrayal. Greed overshadowed loyalty, and trust disintegrated into suspicion. What lay beneath the soil was not only freedom, but chaos waiting to be unleashed. Deadfall exposed the rawest instincts of the fugitives. To some, the money promised salvation. To others, it promised power. But for all of them, it threatened to become the very downfall of their fragile hopes. Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows found themselves dragged deeper into chaos after the scramble for the buried money. What was once a tool for survival had now become a test of loyalty, greed, and desperation. In Unearthed, the fortune pulled from the ground revealed its true nature, a force capable of destroying as much as it promised to save. Michael tried to keep control as they moved closer to the hidden cache. But with every step, the fragile alliance between the fugitives began to fracture. Sucre, blinded by love, acted recklessly in his desperation to secure a future with Maricruz. C-Note, weighed down by his devotion to his family, saw the money as his only salvation. Teabag, sly and poisonous, turned every moment into an opportunity to manipulate. Though their motives differed, all eyes were fixed on the same prize, and that made trust impossible. Lincoln's frustration only grew. For him, the money was nothing but a distraction from what truly mattered, saving his son. Every second spent chasing it gnawed at him, yet Michael insisted on focusing on the bigger picture. To Michael, the buried treasure was not freedom itself, but the bridge that would carry them toward it. This clash of priorities widened the tension between the brothers. Meanwhile, Mahone pressed in closer. With each passing day, he matched Michael's logic more precisely, reading the tattoos, predicting the routes, and anticipating the choices. He was no longer just following. He was shadowing Michael's mind step for step. The chase had shifted from a physical pursuit to an intellectual duel, and Mahone seemed determined to break Michael's spirit. Sarah Tancredi continued to unravel the threads Michael had left behind. Despite her father's control and political weight, her heart pulled her in the opposite direction. Every clue led her deeper into Michael's world, threatening to overturn everything she had believed about her own life. Bellic, stripped of pride and power, threw himself recklessly into the hunt for the money. His desire was no longer justice but greed, a hunger to reclaim the authority he had lost. With nothing left to lose, his pursuit became as ruthless as any of the fugitives. Throughout the episode, the money slipped from hand to hand, its presence poisoning the group. What had been buried in the ground was more than cash. It was temptation itself, feeding on the fugitives' fears and desires. For Michael, it was still only a means to an end. For the others, it became the very meaning of survival. The episode ended in uncertainty, the fortune still contested, the fugitives divided. Unearthed showed that the treasure, far from securing freedom, might instead unravel everything they had fought for. Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows pressed forward after the chaos surrounding the buried money. The escape was no longer just about staying hidden. It now depended on critical meetings that could change the course of their journey. In Rendezvous, the brothers moved closer to allies who might offer hope, even as danger followed every step. Michael placed a clandestine meeting at the center of his next move. For their plan to survive, They needed trustworthy contacts, reliable information, and a route strong enough to outpace the manhunt. But Mahone, sharper than ever, was learning to think exactly as Michael did. His pursuit had become uncanny, his ability to predict Michael's choices, transforming him into a shadow that could not be shaken. Lincoln carried the thought of his son, LJ, like a weight pressing against his chest. Every decision, every risk circled back to the hope of reuniting with him. He believed this meeting could be the doorway to that reunion. Yet his urgency clashed with Michael's calm reasoning. Michael saw only the bigger picture, where precision and caution meant survival. Lincoln, however, believed family was worth every reckless move. Their bond held, but tension ran deep. Elsewhere, the other fugitives kept chasing their own paths. Zucker, reckless in his love, refused to see the dangers surrounding him. C-Note fought to keep the dream of his family alive, each step defined by desperation. Teabag, cunning and merciless, played his own games from the shadows, bending every situation toward his twisted survival. Sarah Tancredi, following the faint signs Michael had left behind, stepped further into peril. Her father's influence still pressed down heavily, but her heart grew louder than the chains binding her. With every clue, she was pulled deeper into Michael's orbit, edging closer to choices that would define her life. Bellick, humiliated and stripped of authority, refused to quit the chase. Greed and rage consumed him, pushing him to pursue the fugitives with even more determination. He no longer acted as an officer of the law, but as a man obsessed with reclaiming power through capture or profit. As the episode unfolded, Michael and Lincoln moved toward the arranged meeting. Yet Mahone's presence loomed dangerously close, his strategy threatening to cut them off before they could reach safety. Michael relied on his intellect, improvising and recalculating to keep them one step ahead. Every decision became a razor's edge between freedom and capture. Rendezvous became a turning point in their escape. The promise of new allies and new directions was also an invitation for danger. The brothers realized that hope came with risk, and freedom would always be balanced against the weight of pursuit. Time was running faster than ever for Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows. In the next stage of their escape plan, another clue hidden in Michael's tattoos revealed itself: Bolshoi booze. This cryptic code pointed them toward a meeting place, a destination that could change everything. Yet Mahone's pressure and the FBI's tightening net turned every step into a deadly chase. When Michael deciphered the symbol, he realized it marked not just a location, but the possibility of gaining tools and resources vital for their continued survival. But with every lead came danger. Michael's intellect pushed him to refine the plan with precision, yet Mahone was now inside his mind. The agent could read the logic behind the tattoos, unraveling Michael's design piece by piece. The advantage that once belonged to Michael had become his greatest vulnerability. Lincoln grew more impatient with every delay. His thoughts never strayed far from LJ, the son he longed to save. To him, Michael's calculated steps felt like wasted time, a barrier keeping him from what truly mattered. Their differences pressed harder than ever, testing the strength of their bond in the face of relentless pursuit. Elsewhere, the other fugitives followed their own desperate paths. Zucker risked everything in his race toward Maricruz, his love making him blind to the dangers ahead. C-Note, burdened by the weight of his family, clung to the hope of reunion, knowing one wrong step could destroy it all. Teabag, cunning as ever, twisted each situation for his own benefit, treating freedom as nothing more than a tool for manipulation and cruelty. Sarah Tancredi continued to chase the fragments Michael had left behind. Her father's shadow loomed heavily, but her heart's voice grew louder, drowning out reason. Each step she took pulled her deeper into Michael's world, forcing her into choices that would reshape her life. Bellick, driven by greed and humiliation, sank further into the pursuit. No longer bound by law or honor, he cared nothing for justice. What mattered was carving out a share for himself no matter the cost. His obsession made him as dangerous as any fugitive. By the end of the episode, Michael's pursuit of Bolshoi booze opened a new path, one that might bring them closer to freedom. Yet it also pulled Mahone even nearer, his shadow stretching across every choice. The chase was no longer measured in days but in seconds, each one carrying the weight of survival. Bolshoi booze stood as both hope and threat, a sign that freedom was within reach, but only if Michael could outthink the forces closing in. The escape was no longer just about maps and plans. It had become a war balanced on the fragile strings of fate. After the chaos of Bolshoi booze, Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows found themselves drawn deeper into danger. The escape was accelerating, but so was the pursuit. With the FBI closing in tighter each day, the brothers faced a new reality. The struggle for freedom was tearing not only at their bodies, but also at the bonds that held them together. Disconnect revealed how easily trust and unity could fracture under pressure. Michael pressed forward with the plan, relying on the coded symbols etched into his skin. Each mark pointed to the next move, but Mahone had learned to follow those same signs. What once gave Michael the advantage now threatened to betray him. Every clue was a door for Michael, but also a window for Mahone. Lincoln's mind never strayed from LJ. His son remained the only light guiding him, and every delay cut him deeper. He argued with Michael, frustrated by the layers of calculation and caution. For Lincoln, time was precious, and each pause felt like a step further from his son. Michael, however, refused to abandon the structure of the plan, knowing that without precision their fragile freedom would collapse. This difference of vision widened the cracks between them. Elsewhere, the other fugitives pushed through their own desperate struggles. Zucker, blinded by love, risked everything in his pursuit of Maricruz, unable to see the dangers closing in. C-Note fought harder to keep his family safe, but the cost of his choices weighed heavily. Teabag, manipulative and cruel, continued twisting every moment to his advantage, feeding on chaos to secure his survival. Sarah Tancredi's journey pulled her further into Michael's world. Her father's influence still shadowed her, but her heart grew louder with each step. Following the faint traces Michael left behind, she began to question not only him but herself. Freedom, she realized, was more complicated than escape. It was about trust, about purpose, and about the risks she was willing to take. Bellick, consumed by greed and anger, descended deeper into obsession. The chase was no longer about justice or duty. For him, it had become a personal vendetta, a desperate bid to reclaim pride and control. That obsession made him as ruthless and dangerous as any of the fugitives he pursued. By the end of the episode, Michael and Lincoln faced a painful fracture. Surrounded by enemies, strained by conflict, and tested by diverging desires, they found themselves drifting apart even as danger closed in around them. Disconnect was more than just a title. It embodied the reality of their struggle, bonds breaking, trust eroding, and the dream of freedom slipping further from reach. Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows were running out of time. Each step forward only tightened the circle around them. Their escape had been tested again and again, but in the killing box, the brothers faced a deadly turning point. Just when freedom seemed close enough to touch, they realized they had walked straight into a trap, designed to end everything. Mahone's pursuit grew sharper with every passing hour. By decoding the symbols etched into Michael's skin, he had begun to reconstruct the escape plan with alarming accuracy. Each move Michael had calculated so carefully was now a thread for Mahone to follow. The chase had transformed into a high-stakes chess match, and Mahone proved himself just as patient and cunning as the man he hunted. Lincoln carried his son's image in his mind, desperate to save him before it was too late. His urgency clashed once more with Michael's methodical patience. Lincoln believed action was the only way forward, while Michael knew freedom depended on the plan being executed with precision. Their conflict simmered beneath the surface, binding them together even as it strained their bond. The other fugitives followed their own fractured paths. Sauka, driven by love, pushed forward recklessly for Maricruz. C-Note, burdened by his family's safety, risked everything for the chance to hold them again. Teabag, ever manipulative, moved like a shadow, using trust as nothing more than bait for betrayal. Their quests for freedom dragged them to the edge of desperation. Sarah Tancredi continued down the dangerous road Michael had set before her. Her father's shadow pressed hard against her choices, yet her heart no longer saw Michael as a criminal. To her, he had become the symbol of something greater: hope, escape, and renewal. Bellic spiraled deeper into rage and greed. The chase no longer carried the meaning of duty. For him, it was personal, a bitter attempt to reclaim pride and control. His recklessness made him as volatile and threatening as any fugitive he pursued. The episode built to a harrowing climax. Surrounded on all sides, Michael and Lincoln were cut off from every path of escape. The box had closed in on them, leaving only two choices: surrender or die trying. The title, The Killing Box, became the perfect reflection of their fate. A cage designed not for confinement, but for destruction. For the brothers, the line between freedom and captivity had never been thinner. Their only weapon left was their intellect, and in this moment, even Michael's genius might not be enough. The episode ended with the chilling truth that sometimes, the closer one gets to freedom, the closer one also comes to losing it forever. After their capture in the Killing Box, Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows faced yet another deadly threat. Freedom had slipped from their grasp, and now their survival depended not only on Michael's intellect, but also on the chaos unfolding around them. In John Doe, questions of identity, secrets, and unexpected turns shaped the next phase of their journey. Mahone, under mounting pressure from the FBI, moved quickly to bring Michael and Lincoln fully under control. His goal was simple: eliminate the brothers before their ingenuity could open another path to freedom. Yet Michael, even in the darkest of moments, searched for weaknesses, for cracks in the trap surrounding them. The battle of minds between Michael and Mahone reached a new intensity, each man testing the other's resolve. Lincoln remained driven by a single thought: his son. Even with capture threatening to end everything, LJ never left his mind. His impatience clashed with Michael's calm logic, but he had no choice but to trust his brother. The tension between urgency and precision deepened, pulling the brothers closer together and tearing them apart at the same time. Meanwhile, Sauka, C-Note, and Teabag continued down their own perilous paths. Sauka's determination to reach Maricruz blinded him to the dangers pressing in. C-Note, weighed down by his devotion to his family, made decisions that carried heavier consequences with every step. And Teabag, ever manipulative and cruel, thrived in the chaos, seeing every person as a tool for his survival. Sarah Tancredi found herself pulled deeper into Michael's shadow. Her father's political weight still pressed against her, but her heart had begun to silence the doubts in her mind. Following the traces Michael left behind, she felt herself crossing a point of no return. Bellic, fueled by anger and greed, refused to let go of the chase. For him, the hunt was no longer about justice, but personal revenge, a desperate attempt to reclaim pride and power. His obsession only made him more unpredictable. At the heart of the episode, Michael and Lincoln's fate became tied to John Doe, a symbol of erased identity. The use of this false name offered a chance to disappear, to slip through the cracks of the system. But it also came with immense risk. Stripped identities could hide them, yet at the same time, it left them vulnerable to being erased completely. From the law, from their families, from themselves. John Doe revealed one of the most pivotal shifts in their struggle. Escape was no longer just about breaking chains or running faster. It now meant rewriting who they were. Freedom stood both farther away and closer than ever, balanced precariously on the fragile idea of identity. Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows knew that running and hiding would not be enough forever. With the FBI closing in and Mahone anticipating their every move, the brothers realized they had to do something bold, speak directly to the world. In The Message, their escape took a new turn as they used the media to tell their story, risking everything to shift the balance in their favor. Michael understood that freedom required more than secrecy. Mahone's relentless pursuit was dismantling their plan piece by piece, and the only way to fight back was to gain public attention. By reaching the media, they could plant doubt in the minds of the people and perhaps gain sympathy for their cause. But this strategy would come at a cost. Visibility meant vulnerability. Lincoln resisted at first. His thoughts were fixed on LJ, and he saw every detour as a delay in reuniting with his son. Yet Michael's determination convinced him. Together they stepped in front of the cameras, delivering their version of the truth. Every word carried weight. Words meant to inspire, to question, to cast light on their innocence. The risk was immense, but for the first time their voices reached beyond the shadows of pursuit. Mahone, however, was never far behind. He anticipated their attempt to turn public opinion and quickly worked to counter it. Watching Michael closely, he treated every move like another puzzle to solve. The battle between them spilled into the open, no longer hidden in codes and secret routes, but fought before the eyes of the nation. Meanwhile, the other fugitives pushed on with their struggles. Zucker risked everything for Maricruz, blinded by his devotion. C-Note, desperate to shield his family, found himself with fewer choices each day. Teabag, cunning and ruthless, twisted every situation to his advantage, turning trust into a weapon for manipulation. Sara Tancredi, caught between loyalty to her father and her growing connection to Michael, drifted further into his orbit. Her father's influence weighed heavily, but her heart guided her toward Michael's path. Every trace she uncovered pulled her deeper, binding her future to his. Bellick, consumed by greed and humiliation, refused to abandon the hunt. He was no longer chasing justice but redemption, driven by a personal need to regain the power he had lost. His presence in the chase made him just as dangerous as any fugitive. By the end of the episode, Michael and Lincoln had broadcast their message to the world. It was a beacon of hope and a target on their backs all at once. Some believed them, others condemned them, but no one could ignore them anymore. The message marked a turning point. The brothers were no longer just fugitives. They were voices fighting for their innocence, turning their escape into a battle not only against the FBI, but also for the judgment of the public eye. After delivering their message to the world, Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows found themselves more exposed than ever. The FBI still hunted them with relentless force, but now the eyes of the public followed as well. In Chicago, the brothers faced one of the most critical chapters in their fight for freedom, where every move carried consequences far beyond their control. Michael worked tirelessly to map out the next phase of their journey. Each route, each calculation had to be precise because Mahone was closer than ever. The agent had nearly perfected the art of thinking like Michael, shadowing his logic step for step. What had once been Michael's strength, his ability to design flawless strategies, had become a dangerous vulnerability. Every plan he made now risked being anticipated before it was even set in motion. Lincoln's focus never wavered from LJ. His son remained his sole purpose, and every delay tore at him. For Lincoln, freedom meant nothing if LJ was not safe. Michael, however, refused to let emotion outweigh logic. To him, only the full execution of the plan could carry them through. This difference in vision tested their bond, straining it and strengthening it at the same time. Meanwhile, Sara Tancredi sank deeper into Michael's orbit. Her father's political shadow loomed large, but her heart pulled her in the opposite direction. Each clue she followed made Michael's choices clearer, and slowly, she began to understand not only his motives, but also the sacrifices behind them. The other fugitives continued down paths fraught with danger. Suka risked his freedom recklessly for Maricruz, blinded by his devotion. C-Note made increasingly perilous decisions in the hope of protecting his family. And Teabag, ever manipulative, exploited every opportunity for his own survival, masking betrayal with charm. Bellic's obsession deepened as greed and humiliation consumed him. For him, the chase was no longer about duty, but about reclaiming power and pride. That desperation made him volatile, a threat as dangerous as any of the fugitives themselves. The heart of the episode came when Michael and Lincoln made a bold move in Chicago. It was a gamble, a step that brought them closer to freedom but also face to face with death. Mahone's pressure, the tightening grip of the FBI, and the weight of their own conflicts combined into a crucible where escape was no longer just about planning. It was about survival in its rawest form. Chicago captured the fragile balance between hope and peril for Michael and Lincoln. Freedom had never felt so close, yet at the same time, so impossibly out of reach. After the dangerous gamble in Chicago, Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows found themselves pulled into an even darker chapter. In Bad Blood, the brothers faced not only the tightening grip of the FBI, but also the shadows of betrayal and painful secrets from the past. Michael pressed forward, searching for ways to keep their plan alive, yet Mahone's pursuit grew sharper by the hour. The FBI agent had reached a point where he could almost anticipate Michael's thoughts. The escape was no longer a race of bodies, but a battle of minds. Michael's precision and Mahone's relentless determination collided like two master players locked in a duel, each trying to break the other. Lincoln, still driven by the dream of reuniting with LJ, struggled with his impatience. Michael's careful strategies seemed to him like delays, obstacles keeping him from his son. But Michael insisted that discipline and calculation were the only path to lasting freedom. Their different perspectives strained their bond, yet it was also what kept them together. The weight of the past pressed heavily on them in this episode. Secrets long buried resurfaced, forcing Michael and Lincoln to confront painful truths about their family. These revelations cut deeply, reminding them that their struggle was not only against the present, but also against the scars of yesterday. The journey forward was no longer just about breaking chains. It was about carrying wounds that had never healed. The other fugitives were also drawn further into darkness. Zucker, blinded by love, risked everything in pursuit of Maricruz, each step more dangerous than the last. C-Note, crushed under the burden of protecting his family, made increasingly desperate moves. And Teabag, cunning and ruthless, manipulated everyone around him, turning survival into a game of deception and cruelty. Sara Tancredi found herself torn between her heart and her mind. Her father's political power weighed heavily on her, but the trust she felt toward Michael grew stronger with each clue she uncovered. The deeper she stepped into his world, the more she tested the limits of her own life and choices. Bellic descended further into obsession. Consumed by greed and rage, he chased the fugitives not for justice but for personal vengeance. His pursuit stripped away what little humanity he still carried, leaving only a bitter determination to reclaim power in any way possible. By the end of the episode, Michael and Lincoln understood the meaning of Bad Blood all too well. Betrayal, secrets, and old wounds were chains as heavy as any prison bars. Their freedom would depend not only on outsmarting Mahone, but also on facing the ghosts that threatened to tear them apart from within. Bad Blood became one of the brothers' harshest tests, blending physical survival with emotional reckoning. Escape was no longer simply about the future. It was about confronting the past that still held them captive. After the revelations of Bad Blood, Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows pressed forward once more. But in Wash, their struggle reached a new level of complexity. This chapter was not only about escaping capture, it was about betrayal, loyalty, and the fragile hope that kept them moving. Michael poured all his energy into refining the plan, knowing that even the smallest error could destroy everything. Mahone, however, was no longer simply chasing them. He was anticipating them. His ability to think like Michael closed every gap, turning the escape into a razor-thin path where one misstep could end it all. Lincoln's thoughts never strayed from LJ. His impatience clashed with Michael's careful precision, creating constant tension between them. Yet their bond, though strained, never broke. Each argument, each moment of conflict, only reinforced their need to stay together, because they both knew survival depended on unity. Sarah Tancredi's internal battle deepened. Her father's political influence and the dangerous world surrounding him pulled her into a spiral of pressure and risk. Still, the trust she had begun to place in Michael guided her choices more than anything else. By following him, she had reached a point of no return, where her life was now tied to his fate. Elsewhere, the other fugitives faced their own turbulent paths. Zucker's devotion to Maricruz drove him to reckless actions, placing his freedom on the line. C-Note, desperate to keep his family safe, took greater and greater risks. Gan T-Bag, sly and manipulative, continued to twist circumstances in his favor, using deception as his most powerful weapon. Bellic, consumed by greed, pushed further into obsession. For him, the chase was no longer about justice, it was about pride, power, and personal redemption. This made him unpredictable and dangerous, a hunter who cared nothing for the rules. The heart of the episode came with betrayal. Michael and Lincoln discovered that danger did not only come from outside forces, but from those around them. Trust, already fragile, began to crack. The realization that loyalty could fail was as devastating as any trap Mahone might set. By the end of Wash, freedom no longer looked like a destination waiting ahead. It had become something fragile, a dream constantly under threat. For the brothers, survival meant more than running from the FBI. It meant enduring betrayal, carrying the weight of fractured trust, and clinging to hope even as it slipped away. Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows' fight for freedom reached an entirely new stage in Sweet Caroline. This time, Michael's intelligence and courage carried him straight into the presence of President Caroline Reynolds herself. The chase was no longer confined to the FBI. It now intersected with the highest levels of power in the country. For weeks, Michael had been piecing together the fragments of a massive conspiracy. At its very top stood President Reynolds, the key figure behind the chain of murder, lies, and betrayal. Determined to reveal the truth, Michael risked everything by confronting her directly. It was more than escape. It was a battle for justice, a declaration against the system that had destroyed their lives. Lincoln supported his brother's bold move, yet fear gnawed at him. Every step Michael took seemed to bring them closer to both the truth and the edge of destruction. Lincoln's heart remained fixed on his son, but Michael insisted that freedom could not exist without exposing the larger scheme. Sarah Tancredi's journey grew darker as well. Crushed under her father's political weight and the shadow of the conspiracy, she leaned further toward Michael. The more she believed in his cause, the more she risked her own life. For Sarah, the point of return was long behind her. She was fully entangled in Michael's war. Meanwhile, Mahone's pursuit tightened. His uncanny ability to think like Michael kept him close at every turn. Yet Mahone's personal demons and the pressure of his superiors made his actions more unstable, more dangerous. He was a predator on the edge of collapse, but that only made him more lethal. The other fugitives continued their separate struggles. Zucker's love for Maricruz drove him into reckless gambles. C-Note fought desperately to keep his family safe, while T-Bag sharpened his manipulations, twisting everyone he encountered into pawns for his survival. Each man walked a thin line between hope and ruin. Bellic, consumed by greed and bitterness, pushed further into obsession. His hunt had become a way to reclaim pride and power, not justice. The deeper he went, the more ruthless he became, making him as dangerous as the criminals he pursued. The defining moment of the episode came with Michael's confrontation with Reynolds. Looking her in the eye, he spoke truths the world had been denied. The conspiracy, the false conviction, the injustice of a brother sentenced to die for a crime he did not commit. In that moment, Michael ceased to be only a fugitive. He became a voice challenging the system itself. Sweet Caroline revealed that their escape was never just about running. It was about unmasking corruption, about fighting for justice in a world where power silenced truth. For Michael and Lincoln, the path ahead meant not only fleeing the FBI, but also standing against the most powerful figure in the nation. After challenging the highest power in Sweet Caroline, Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows shifted their hopes of freedom to an entirely new stage in Panama. Escaping America's grip seemed possible only by crossing into another land, and Panama appeared to be both a refuge and a trap. Michael carefully laid out his strategy to move their escape south. In his calculations, Panama could serve as a place to hide, regroup, and finally breathe outside the constant reach of the authorities. But Mahone was relentless. He had learned to think like Michael, to follow his patterns so closely that distance no longer mattered. Wherever the brothers went, Mahone would be waiting. The escape was no longer just a plan of movement. It had become a battle against fate itself. Lincoln welcomed the idea of Panama with cautious hope. The thought of being closer to LJ made him embrace the new path, yet his fear never left him. Each new step brought the brothers closer, not only to freedom but also to danger. The fine line between life and death grew thinner with every decision. Michael's calm reasoning collided once more with Lincoln's anxiety, creating tension even as they stood side by side. Sarah Tancredi's role deepened further. Her loyalty to Michael drove her into choices that erased any chance of turning back. She no longer thought of her own safety. Her only resolve was to stay at Michael's side, to face whatever storm lay ahead. For Michael, Sarah became both a source of strength and an added responsibility he could not ignore. Elsewhere, the fugitives followed their own turbulent paths. Zauka saw Panama as a door to hope, a place where he might finally reach Maricruz. C-Note, cornered by his sacrifices for his family, was running out of options. And Teabag, true to his nature, twisted every circumstance in his favor, sowing seeds of betrayal wherever he went. Bellic's hunger dragged him all the way to Panama as well. His pursuit had long ceased to be about justice. It was now about filling the void of his losses and reclaiming power. This greed turned him ruthless, a dangerous predator with nothing to lose. The defining moment of the episode came as Panama revealed its true nature. For Michael and Lincoln, it was not a sanctuary but a battlefield filled with traps, pressure, and enemies waiting at every corner. Mahone's shadow, the weight of the FBI, and their own personal struggles collided in a storm that made survival more fragile than ever. Panama showed that freedom was not a destination, but a struggle that kept shifting with every move. For the brothers, escape had now crossed borders, transforming into a fight that spanned continents and demanded everything they had left to give. When Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows stepped into Panama, they knew they were walking a razor's edge between hope and despair. In Fin del Camino, their struggle reached one of its harshest trials, as Panama became both a promise of freedom and a deadly trap. Michael understood that Mahone would never stop. No matter how carefully he built his strategies, Mahone had learned to anticipate his logic. Every step through the streets of Panama felt like moving across a chessboard where the opponent already knew the next move. To survive, Michael had to reshape his plans once more, adjusting each detail against the relentless pursuit. Lincoln's heart remained fixed on LJ, yet in Panama's chaos, the path to his son became more uncertain than ever. Though he trusted Michael, his patience frayed with every delay. Each calculated step his brother took seemed to Lincoln like another risk, another chance to lose everything before reuniting with his child. Sarah Tancredi was drawn further into danger as she chose to remain at Michael's side. The shadow of her father's political world was behind her now, replaced by an unshakable faith in Michael. But that loyalty came at a price. She was now a direct target for both the FBI and the company. For Michael, Sarah was both his greatest source of strength and the weakness that left him vulnerable. The other fugitives reached turning points of their own. Zucker risked everything for Maricruz, blinded by devotion even as danger closed in around him. Zenote, burdened by sacrifice for his family, found himself sinking deeper into despair. And Teabag perfected his deceit, wielding betrayal like a weapon as he twisted every situation to his advantage. Bellick's greed carried him into Panama as well. His mission was no longer about law or order. It was about salvaging pride and clawing back what he had lost. That desperation transformed him into something ruthless, a man whose obsession made him as dangerous as those he hunted. The true weight of the episode came with Mahone's shadow, looming ever closer. For Michael and Lincoln, every step in Panama revealed his presence. It was no longer simply about running from the FBI. It was a desperate attempt to escape their own fate. Fin del Camino, true to its name, felt like the end of the road. Freedom seemed only a few steps away, yet those steps were balanced precariously between life and death. Panama carried both their dreams and their nightmares, forcing them to realize that survival would demand everything they had left. Michael Scofield and Lincoln Burrows' long flight reached its breaking point in Sona, the explosive Season 2 finale. What had begun as a desperate escape through the United States now led them into the heart of Panama, where the dream of freedom turned into a deadly trap. Michael tried, as always, to outthink the enemy. Every detail, every calculation was designed to give them an edge. But Mahone had learned too much. He moved like a shadow inside Michael's mind, predicting every turn. What unfolded was no longer a simple chase between an agent and a fugitive, but a duel between two brilliant minds, each fighting with everything they had left. Lincoln's faith in his brother never wavered, but fear grew within him. His heart remained tied to LJ, and every moment pushed him closer to despair. Freedom was within reach, yet the cost revealed itself as unbearable. He began to wonder how much further Michael's choices could take them, and whether sacrifice had become inevitable. Sarah Tancredi, bound to Michael by love and trust, stood at the center of the storm. By choosing him, she had stepped into a life where danger pressed from every side. Each move brought her closer to risk, and for Michael her presence was both a source of strength and a weight he could not lay down. Meanwhile, the other fugitives struggled with their own paths. Zucker, driven by love, risked everything to be with Maricruz. Zenote found himself consumed by desperation, his sacrifices tightening around him like chains. And Teabag, ever manipulative, wielded betrayal as a weapon, turning survival into a twisted game that left ruin in his wake. Bellick descended deeper into greed and obsession, driven not by justice, but by his own hunger to reclaim power. Panama only sharpened his desperation, transforming him into a threat as unpredictable as any fugitive. The heart of the episode came when Michael and Mahone finally confronted each other. Their battle was fought not just with weapons but with wits, in a clash where every choice meant survival or death. Mahone pushed to break him, while Michael used his final reserves of cunning to protect his brother. Yet every victory carried a price. In the final moments, Michael made the ultimate sacrifice. To save Lincoln, he surrendered himself, placing his life in the balance. His capture led him not to freedom, but to the gates of Sona, a notorious Panamanian prison where survival itself was uncertain. Sona closed the season with devastating impact. Freedom slipped from the brothers' grasp once again, leaving Michael trapped and Lincoln forced to carry the weight of his brother's sacrifice. The story of their escape was not over. It had only entered a darker, more merciless chapter,